Hi everyone, hope you're doing alright, hope you're keeping safe, hope you're keeping sane. Now for the third video in a row, I'm going to start by saying if I had £1 for every time I told myself that I was going to quit gambling and that I wasn't going to do this anymore, then I wouldn't have the gambling debts that I still have. I went through a cycle of failing when it came to recovery, of giving up if you want to use a cliche. And what I want to talk about in this video is why we go through this cycle and we start a recovery, we commit to a recovery, only to lapse, relapse, and start again. The cycle for me always used to go a bit like this. I'd have a particularly bad loss or a particularly heavy gambling session that would cause some other form of problem in my life. For example, maybe I'd been at the bookies after work, come home in a really foul mood, dinner had been burnt, missus was pissed off, had a big row, said, right, I need to do something about this. Now in the short term, recovery was actually quite easy, and a lot of the time it's easy because you've done all your money and so you can't gamble anyway even if you wanted to, and also because you're suffering from some form of gambling hangover. You know, maybe it is off the back of that row with your significant other, or maybe it's just the pain of losing money that you couldn't afford, or money you had earmarked for something else, or whatever it is. There is a gambling hangover and a form of sort of mental harm that you've done to yourself in the short term. However, that, of course, will subside as a regular hangover will do, and eventually the urges will creep back in, and that memory becomes less of an incentive not to gamble. So what happens is you go back to gambling again, and the cycle continues, and the cycle continues, and sometimes the gaps and the periods of abstinence are larger than others. Sometimes we do actually make more than a half-assed attempt to stick to what we've told ourselves and to not gamble. But ultimately, once the motivation to quit fades, the urges become stronger, of course, and we go back to what we're doing. So, as Einstein may have said once, and may have been possibly misattributed to, but certainly has been massively overquoted, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that's absolutely true, and for many, many years during my gambling years, I was, by that definition, insane. I was doing the same thing over and over again, telling myself that I was not going to gamble anymore, and then inevitably lapsing, relapsing, going back to gambling, and the cycle continued. And I see it a lot now. And the reason I give you this background about how many times I'd failed is because I never want to come across as if I'm lecturing, as if I'm saying that I'm right and, you know, people who are still gambling are wrong, or that somehow I'm talking from some high horse, because you don't know how many times I'd failed in recovery before I actually took the bull by the horns. Oh God, it's not going to be one of these videos that's full of cliches again, is it? I took the bull by the horns and actually did something different, did something practical, and broke that cycle of insanity. So what I want to talk about today is the triangle of addiction. Now, this is kind of a sort of gambling addiction 101 lesson, really, but it is something that if you have gambling counselling, gambling therapy, and you talk to the professionals about, it's something that they very strongly adhere to. And although I had my pros and cons about gambling counselling, I strongly recommend, if it's not something you've tried, that you give it a go. But this is something that I think is very important, and in the early days of gambling addiction recovery, in the early days of recovery, these tools are incredibly powerful. As I said in my last video about willpower, over time the urges become more infrequent and they become less strong. However, in the early stages of gambling addiction, once that gambling hangover's worn off, the urges are very, very strong. And it's this time where willpower is at its most flawed, and where actual positive, progressive steps and blocks and measures are put in place to actually help you through this bit, so that later on down the line, not gambling becomes more of a routine. And that's the transition I found, is it went from going day to day, having to actively tell myself that I wasn't going to gamble, having to actively avoid gambling, having to rely on the measures and the blocks I put in place, and by talking to people, you know, restricting myself from gambling. That was the early days, but over time, not gambling has actually become more ingrained in my life. I think they say it takes 90 days to sort of break a cycle of behaviour, and that sounds about right. Now, don't get me wrong, even today I still get gambling urges, and certainly it wasn't a case of sort of do 90 days and suddenly you're cured. As much as I don't like this notion that we will forever be addicts, I do think you have to forever be on your guard, and I do think that complacency can be a real problem for recovering gamblers, because you get to a point where those urges are fairly infrequent, and you can walk past a bookie, so you can sit in the pub for an hour and not play the fruit machine. You know, you can go online after your wife's gone to bed and not go onto a gambling site, as you would have done traditionally. But complacency is definitely the enemy of recovery, and I, to this day, have to be very much on my guard. And fortunately, I have sufficient blocks in place where even if my guard slips slightly, I shouldn't be in a position to do myself too much harm. And certainly I have sufficient time and headspace to address the urges before I'm actually able to act on them. So that little bit of personal insight aside, I'm talking about the time, money and opportunity triangle, the triangle of gambling addiction. And basically the essence of this is, if we picture a triangle, money's on one side, time's on the other, and opportunity, sometimes called availability or access or something like that, is on the third side. If you take away one of those sides entirely, then you're not able to gamble. You need all those three things. You need the time to gamble, you need the money to gamble, and you need to have access to it. You need the opportunity to gamble. And if, like I say, if you can remove one of these elements entirely, you can't gamble and you're safe, so to speak. Obviously, if you can completely annihilate the triangle and take out all the sides in one hit, then you're home and dry. You're on the home run. But as we'll discover, that's not necessarily easy. So if we start with time, now time is one of the things that I've most appreciated since being in recovery. I've gained so much time, and although I knew I was gambling too much, too frequently, and financially too much as well, I knew I was gambling too regularly, I knew I was spending too much time gambling, but it's only when I stopped I actually realised how much time I had spent. So time is actually quite a hard one to eliminate because we can make time. I mean, I know that I deprived myself of sleep when I was gambling because I wanted to stay up and gamble. But what we can do is find other things to fill our time. Now, these things don't have to be monumental. They don't have to be massively productive. If you go to counselling, or if you watch a lot of stuff on YouTube or read a lot of stuff, people will sort of immediately suggest that you go and do something really worthwhile. You know, volunteer for a charity, go to the gym, work on your health, read a self-help book, or do something really productive and constructive. Don't worry about that. Just do something. Just do something that's not gambling. If you like gaming, then, money you save from not gambling for a little while, buy yourself a PS5 or whatever the latest one is. I'd be honest, I don't really keep up with it. But do some gaming. That's a great thief of time. And in the early days, it doesn't matter if you're not doing anything constructive. Just do something that's not gambling. If you enjoy just going out for a walk and just wandering around in the cold and the wet and the wind like I do because I'm a bit weird, I love it. I love going out when it's really windy and wet and stuff. And I don't know why. Anyway, do that. Just go out for a wander for a couple of hours. Just kill the time. It seems like a waste of time. It seems like you're just disposing of this. Here's me saying, oh, yeah, it's great, you get all this time back. But in the short term, just make sure you fill that time with something that's not gambling. However inane it is. Don't feel like you should be doing something massively constructive, because what you're doing that's, constructive already is not gambling with that time you've got available. Like I say, it's very, very hard to eliminate the time side of the triangle altogether, but certainly just in the short term, find a way to fill your spare time. And over time, you'll find more interesting practical hobbies, and maybe you will take up going to the gym. Maybe you will write your memoirs or whatever. I don't know, whatever you want to do. But in the short term, just keep yourself busy. Money. Now, as I said, the top end of this video, sometimes money is the greatest factor we have when it comes to quitting gambling. It's the side of the triangle that we manage to annihilate ourselves payday after payday because we've gambled all our money away. And we're not able to gamble. And again, like I say, this is why sometimes it's so easy not to gamble in the short term, because we ain't got any cash to do it, because we've blown it all. But in the longer term, we will get more money, be that through the next payday, be that through benefits, be that through dividends. However you get the money that you use to sustain your life, you will get more at some point. And actually, that's an important point, that money is ultimately replaceable. So if we can stop doing ourselves financial damage time after time, the money will come back, but it will never come back through gambling. But anyway, that's a bit of a sideline. So what can we do to eliminate the money side of the triangle? Because we still need to live. I've spoken lots in previous videos about checking with your bank. Check with your bank and see if they have a way where you can block all gambling transactions. That will stop you using your card in bookmakers or online casinos and on any site that is basically a gambling site. It's not a watertight solution, of course, but it's a good step in the right direction. One thing that you'll hear a lot of people suggest is handing your finances over to a loved one. Now, this is something that I really didn't want to do, and I don't know why. I think maybe subconsciously it was the gambler in me wanting to keep that gambling pot of money, to myself and keep it secretive. And because I was so used to being secretive with money, because I was blowing it all the time, I guess allowing someone to have access to my money, to look after my money, didn't really sit very true with me. But trust me, it is a very, very powerful technique. What you can do, and what I now have, which is pretty good, as sort of a practical tip, is if you don't want to give all your money over to a loved one or whatever, then set up a joint account with someone that you trust. I have one with my wife, and we have a Monzo account, a joint Monzo account, and all the money that we need for us goes in there. And if I was to spend as much as 10p on a chomp bar, I don't think chomp bars are 10p anymore, are they? I think they're probably like a quid by now, no doubt. If I was to spend as little as 10p, it will flag up on her phone. She'll get a notification to say, yep, you've spent this much on the joint account. So that blocks any gambling transactions. It also blocks cash withdrawals, because obviously you could go to the cash point around the corner from the bookies, couldn't you? Draw out the cash and use that and do your brains that way. But if you're drawing out 200-300 quid of cash, and your wife's or partner or friend or mum, dad, whatever, sister, brother, illegitimate lover, whatever, gets a notification to say you've drawn £200 out of the joint account, they're going to want to know where that's gone. As always, I will have put a caveat on this and say, yes, of course, it's always possible to cover up your behaviours, particularly this time of year, because, I can't tell you, it's a secret. And then you've suddenly got to find some money from somewhere to go and buy them some really extravagant Christmas present. But anyway, that's a good way of day-to-day keeping control of your money. If you don't want to hand it all over and get given pocket money, which is a perfectly legitimate technique and does work for a lot of people, but if you want to maintain that money yourself and maintain control over it, but you can't be trusted, and I can't be trusted probably to this day to have large sums of money sitting about, then that's a good way that someone that knows about your gambling problem and someone who you can trust can keep an eye on it, can monitor it, and can make sure that you're not gambling. So that's money. And the last one, of course, is opportunity or access, sometimes people say. Now, this is one that's become inherently trickier. Of course, we can now gamble 24/7. Online casinos, online poker sites, online bookies, 24-hour arcades, pubs that, well, when they're open, if they're open ever again, you can go in at any time and play on the free machines or whatever. There is forms of gambling that are available to us all the time. But whilst technology has inherently made gambling more accessible and has made it, like I say, available 24/7 and more of an issue in that respect, technology has also offered up some solutions to this opportunity and to this access. We have the multi-operator self-exclusion scheme for bookmakers now, which is accessible online, so you don't even need to go into the bookies anymore and hand over your photos. Just very quick side note on that, what I'd say is if you are going to do that, I would still recommend going into your local bookmakers, the ones that you are likely to use the most or go to the most, and handing over your self-exclusion form with your passport photos. And the reason for that being is because you'll be more recognisable to the staff in that particular shop. However, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can do it online, but I just a bit of a tip there that, like I say, that's a good way of knowing. And I've spoken to some people about this before and who have said to me, does the self-exclusion in bookmakers actually work? Will they actually recognise you? Will they actually stop you from going in, playing the properties, placing a bet, whatever? And the honest answer to that is no idea. Not a clue. Never tried it. Never done it. The shame, or the potential shame, of walking in there and going to go and place a bet when I know I'm self-excluded and being told to leave because I'm self-excluded, I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want the embarrassment. I wouldn't want the humiliation and the shame of doing that. Particularly now when, although I have a relatively small YouTube channel, on the off chance that someone was to recognise me, which I appreciate is a very small chance, but it's there and it's enough. It is enough to stop me from gambling, because it only takes one person now that recognised me, and the whole thing's makes a mockery of everything I do, and it's a charade. So that's for me personally. But yeah, like I say, go to the local bookies and self-exclude physically if you're up for doing it. And one last thing on that, I know this video's running a bit, but there's obviously quite a lot to talk about here. Is you might feel embarrassed to go in and ask to self-exclude. Two things. Firstly, the staff behind the counter probably don't care. Probably couldn't care less. It's just part of their job. They probably hand out loads of self-exclusion forms. They don't care. They're not thinking anything of you. They don't even know you. They don't care who you are. You're just that bloke who comes in and rows the fob teas all the time. So don't worry about that. And on the off chance that poor minimum wage member of staff who has to sit behind that counter in the bookies all day, probably getting abuse from random people, on the off chance they actually do care a bit more about the jobs and about the customers, and they do recognise you as maybe a problem gambler, the only thing they're going to think about you is positive. They're going to think, well, good, I've seen this guy. I'm sure the people in my local bookies thought, oh, bloody hell, that's good. I've seen this guy come in so many times feeding notes into these machines and walking out, looking, well, I say looking dejected. We don't, do we? Walk out with our heads held high because we're a bit weird like that. But, and they'll probably think, oh, good for him. He's doing something. He's sorting his life out, and that's that. So don't feel ashamed is what I'm saying. Other blocks, GamStop, can't, I've banged on about GamStop so much, but I really can't praise it enough. There are other ones out there. Gamban is, I think it's a paid service, but that's supposed to be very effective. That works, GamStop, I believe, works with registration, so you register your details, which means then you can't register those same details with the casinos and with the betting sites. I think Gamban, and someone might want to correct me if I'm wrong here, actually blocks the sites themselves. So if in doubt, get both. What's the harm? This is my theory. What's the harm in doing it? If you don't want to gamble, if you're committed to your recovery, then go belt and braces on it. Don't matter at all. Put as many things in place as possible. And like I say, this is where, whilst technology has made gambling more accessible and potentially more dangerous, it can actually offer solutions to the same problem. So use all the online restrictions you have in place. Go through, self-exclude yourself from every website that you're currently a member of, even if you plan to install GamStop, just on the case, the off chance that one of these slips through the net. I spoke a little while ago about casinos that aren't on GamStop and how this scourge of, I'm not even going to go back into it. There's a video about it on my channel, so have a look at that. But if you have time, sit down with someone, possibly the same person who you've got your bank details with, sit down with someone you trust and who knows about your problem and go through to all the online casinos that aren't registered on GamStop. There is a list of them available. I'm not going to list them here. And self-exclude with them, all of them as well. And that way, it's just another block. It's just something else you can do. Like I say, it used to be a case that you couldn't place a bet when the bookies were shut, if we go back far enough. Now you can place a bet anywhere at any time. So there are a lot more opportunities. It's harder to get rid of that side of the triangle completely, but there are real solid things you can do to address that. And on top of all of this, get help. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, but speak to a counsellor. Again, you might not think it's for you. It might not be the right thing for you. It might not actually do you too much good, but it's not going to do you any harm. I had some free counselling sessions with Break Even. The lady I had the sessions with was really nice, really good, really understanding. I took some stuff away from there. I wouldn't say that all of it was particularly useful or relevant to my circumstances and my recovery, but it certainly did me more good than harm, and it was free. There'll be a link in the description below for Break Even anyway. If you're struggling, and time again you're going through the same cycle, and you think, I'm trying to recover here, and you're serious about it, then try Gamblers Anonymous. I've spoken again in the past about how Gamblers Anonymous isn't really for me, but it's so successful for so many people and it's saved so many people, and I don't hesitate to say that it's saved thousands of lives. It's got to be worth a go. If you're struggling, it's worth a go. There is a lot of help out there. Gamcare, all the rest of it. There's loads of it. And there's loads of support as well on forums and obviously here on YouTube with myself and all the rest of it. There's so much help out there. There's so much support. There are so many tools. Use all of them. Use as many of these tools as you can at your disposal to eliminate as much of this triangle as you can. Because if you can get rid of one side completely, you're sorted. But that's really hard. So get rid of as much of all the sides as you can and make gambling difficult for yourself. The last one I'll end with is this. Is if you're going through this cycle and you keep finding yourself lapsing and relapsing and you're not taking these measures, then no disrespect from me. That's cool. You do you. But be honest with yourself and decide whether you actually want to quit. Are you realising that you need to quit? Are you reaching a point where you think, oh God, I've got a problem here? And you do, because if you acknowledge you have an addiction, the conscious part of your brain tells you that you should be doing something about it. I know that I drink too much. I'm not alcohol dependent, but I know that I drink too much. If I knew I tipped over and I became an alcoholic and I knew I had an addiction, then the conscious part of your brain goes, I need to do something about this. And it told me that time and time again when I was gambling. I knew I had an addiction. So you think, right, must address this. But if you don't want to address it, if you're not ready to address it, if you're not, if you don't have the desire to recover and to abstain, then you're always going to fail. And like I say, that's no disrespect to those who are in that position, because I was in that position and repeatedly. And it's only when actually I really decided and something switched, and I couldn't tell you what it was that made it happen, but something in my brain switched and I went, actually, you know what, no, I want to do this now. It's not a case of I'm ruining my life, I'm always skint, I'm arguing with the wife, all these things that they're all factors that make you know that you've got a problem. They're factors that make you know you need to quit or you need to address this issue. But they're not enough a lot of the time to actually push you to do it until you decide in yourself and for yourself that you want to change. And that's the important thing. But if you do want to change, address those three sides of the triangle, and get some help and speak to professionals. I always say I'm not a professional. I'm just a guy who rambles a lot and needed a haircut. Look at that. That's terrible, isn't it? But thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Have a great Christmas. Like, subscribe, notification bell, all that great stuff. And I'll catch you on the next one. But stay safe. Stay sane. All the best.